We've always been told the European palaces of the 17th to 18th centuries were illuminated by candles made of pure beeswax, thousands of them every single night. Versailles, the Winter Palace, Schönbrunn, grand halls shimmering with flames, balls that danced until dawn, lavish receptions and celebrations. The sheer romance of the Baroque era. Step into the grand hall of any such palace and tilt your head back. Enormous crystal chandeliers hang overhead, each holding dozens or even hundreds of candles. And there are multiple such chandeliers scattered throughout the palace. On the walls, elaborate candelabras. On the tables, ornate candlesticks. All of it supposedly burning simultaneously. Each candle burns out in just a few hours. That means during a single evening, they'd need to be replaced multiple times. Picture the sheer scale of it. Every day, servants would have to climb ladders right up to the ceiling, swapping out thousands of candles in chandeliers perched 15 to 20 meters high. Every day, fresh candles arriving by the wagon load. Where were these mountains of wax stored? And more crucially, where did all that beeswax come from? They'll tell you. From apiaries, beekeepers, purchases from peasants. Sure, that sounds fine. But then, where were the massive apiaries capable of supplying the palaces across all of Europe? Why is there utter silence in the archives about wax deliveries, when every single barrel of wine is meticulously documented? What if the candles in royal palaces weren't what we've been led to believe? What if the lighting operated on entirely different principles? Ones that were later dubbed candles to conceal a lost technology. And now, we'll uncover all the oddities that official history so diligently sidesteps. Beeswax is a natural product produced by worker bees. They secrete it from wax glands on their abdomens to build honeycombs. It's an incredibly energy-draining process for these insects. To produce just 1 kilogram of wax, a bee family must gather around 8 kilograms of honey and process it internally. Wax is only produced by young, robust colonies during periods of active hive growth. A single average bee family, over an entire summer season, produces a maximum of 2 to 3 kilograms of marketable wax suitable for candles, and that's under ideal conditions. Perfect weather, plentiful nectar sources, a healthy queen, no diseases. In a poor year, a family might produce no wax at all, channeling all resources into survival. In winter, wax production halts entirely. Beeswax was worth its weight in gold precisely because it was scarce and the extraction process was complex. It was used for church candles in wealthy temples and monasteries, reserved for especially important services. For royal palaces, only the finest wax candles were supposedly used, burning brightly, evenly, and with almost no soot. But where did they source such colossal volumes of this rare and pricey material? Let's try to envision a typical evening at Versailles during the reign of Louis XIV. The royal palace boasts dozens of staterooms, corridors, and apartments. The Hall of Mirrors. The main gallery, 73 meters long and 10 meters wide, capable of holding up to 1,000 people during grand receptions. The lighting had to be maximally brilliant to make the 357 mirrors on the walls, the crystal chandeliers, and the gilded stucco ceilings sparkle. In this hall alone, there are several dozen massive chandeliers and hundreds of wall-mounted sconces. Each sconce holds several candles. Each chandelier, dozens. Now add the rest of the premises. The throne room, the ballroom, the king's chambers, the queen's quarters, the courtiers' apartments, the chapel, corridors, grand staircases, inner courtyards with lanterns. Everything had to burn simultaneously from dusk until dawn. A ball might last 6 to 8 hours, sometimes until morning. During that span, candles would need full replacement 2 or 3 times, as each burns for 3 to 4 hours at most. And these grand receptions didn't happen once a month or only on holidays. They occurred almost every evening, every day without exception. Where did they get such quantities of candles daily? Let's return to the chandeliers themselves and grasp the magnitude of the issue. A crystal chandelier, weighing from half a ton to a full ton, dangles from the ceiling at 15 to 20 meters, secured by heavy chains or rods. It houses 100 to 300 candles, each in its own socket. A candle burns for 3 to 4 hours max before fizzling out to a stub. After 4 hours, all 300 candles in one chandelier need replacing. The chandelier is bolted firmly into the ceiling structure. It can't be lowered to the floor. Officially, no mechanisms for safely raising and lowering such heavy fixtures existed in the 17th century. So, someone had to physically ascend to each chandelier, at the height of a 6-story building, via extension ladders or scaffolding built inside the hall. Imagine the absurdity. The hall teems with guests in opulent attire. The ball is underway, couples twirling, the orchestra playing. And amid all this splendor, massive wooden scaffolds loom, with servants scrambling up them, arms full of candles. Total nonsense. The alternative: chandeliers were lowered and raised using special winches and pulley systems. Then why hasn't a single such lifting mechanism survived in any palace museum? No blueprints, no descriptions of the designs. In modern palace museums, chandeliers hang utterly immobile. They're cleaned and maintained once a year with cherry pickers and scaffolding, shutting down the hall for weeks. Yet supposedly, in the 17th century, this was done every evening before each ball. The archives of European royal courts have survived remarkably well for documents 3 centuries old. They pedantically record every court expense down to the tiniest detail. Food, wine, fabrics, furniture, jewelry, hunting, entertainments. Every sack of flour for the royal kitchens, every barrel of wine from a specific region. All noted in thick ledgers with suppliers' names and addresses, exact prices, delivery dates, quality assessments. Expenses are detailed so thoroughly that modern historians can reconstruct the king's daily menu. But when you search for records of regular, industrial-scale beeswax purchases, an eerie, inexplicable silence descends. Mentions of wax are exceedingly rare, fragmented, and vague. For instance, in the Versailles archives from the 1680s, there are a couple of entries about one-off wax purchases for court needs, without specifying quantities in kilograms or poods, without suppliers' names or locations, without transaction prices. This, while every penny of other expenses is dissected to the minutest detail. For contrast, records of regular wine purchases span dozens of pages, listing varieties, production regions, volumes and barrels, winemakers' names. Yet wax, supposedly required in tons weekly, gets one murky line once a year. Why the stark difference? Perhaps they weren't buying that much wax, or any at all in the claimed volumes. To supply one major royal palace with wax candles in the officially stated amounts would require veritable industrial apiaries of unbelievable size. Even conservative estimates of daily consumption imply the need for tens of thousands of productive bee families operating year-round. An apiary with 10,000 hives is a colossal agricultural enterprise, spanning several square kilometers. Around it must stretch vast fields of blooming nectar plants to feed the bees. It would need an entire infrastructure, hundreds of professional beekeepers, warehouses for honey and wax storage, workshops for raw material processing, roads for transportation. Such complexes should be glaringly visible and documented in the era's records. So, where were they located geographically? In the nearby environs of Versailles, in the rural Ile-de-France, around St. Petersburg in its harsh climate, near Vienna in Austria? Historical maps and land documents from the 17th to 18th centuries show no trace of such gigantic apiary estates. There are records of small peasant apiaries with a few dozen hives. That's standard rural practice. But industrial beekeeping capable of supplying royal palaces with wax on the required scale? Nowhere documented. Not a single map, not a single mention, not a single place name. Perhaps because such apiaries simply didn't exist. For common folk, townspeople, and peasants, candles were mass-produced from tallow, animal fat from cows, sheep, pigs. Tallow candles were cheap and accessible. Their production didn't demand rare resources, but they had critical flaws for use in grand halls. First, they smoked terribly, leaving a thick, black, oily residue on every surface. Walls, ceilings, furniture, mirrors. Second, they emitted a dim, yellowish, flickering light that's harsh on the eyes. Third, they gave off a revolting smell of burnt fat that permeated the room and clothing. Fourth, they melted even at room temperature, constantly dripping and forming pools of grease. Such candles suited peasant huts, poor urban homes, artisans' workshops. For royal palaces, categorically unsuitable. Try imagining the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles lit by 1,000 tallow candles. Within an hour, all 357 mirrors and dozens of crystal chandeliers would be coated in a thick layer of greasy soot. The air in the hall saturated with the heavy stench of fried lard. Breathing would be a chore. Candles dripping onto marble floors, expensive carpets, ball gowns worth a province's annual budget. This isn't luxury and grandeur. It's a nightmare. That's precisely why, per the official narrative, royal palaces used exclusively pure beeswax. It burns brightly, evenly, cleanly, with almost no odor. But again and again, the same question arises. Where did they get such unimaginable quantities of expensive wax? Even the highest quality wax candles inevitably release significant heat and some soot when burning. 1 or 2 candles, unnoticeable. But imagine 1,000 candles burning simultaneously in one enclosed space. That's a whole different scale of problem. The temperature in the hall would inevitably rise by tens of degrees, even in winter. In cold seasons, this could pass as supplemental heating. But what about summer in the sweltering months? Summer balls and receptions under thousands of flaming candles would turn the halls into steam baths. People in heavy, multi-layered dresses, wigs, corsets, dense doublets. They'd be fainting from the stifling heat and overheating. Moreover, even pure beeswax produces a light but noticeable soot when burned. Thousands of candles over several hours would coat the ceiling, upper walls, chandelier surfaces, and mirrors in a thin gray film. After each nighttime reception, a massive morning cleanup would be required, manually wiping hundreds of enormous mirrors, cleaning thousands of crystal pendants on chandeliers, washing the gilded stucco on ceilings and walls. This is daily, hours-long labor for dozens of servants with ladders and stepladders. But why is there absolutely no mention of this in the memoirs of 17th to 18th century courtiers? People of that era noted and described the tiniest details of palace life: the order of dish service at table, orchestra melodies, ladies' dress fashions, intrigues, and gossip. But lighting and its aftermath? As if utterly invisible. As if the problem didn't exist at all. Why such peculiar silence? Beeswax in large quantities needs storage under specific conditions before use. It's not like wine, which ages peacefully in cellars for years, improving with time. Wax is a finicky material demanding precise storage. It absolutely fears high temperatures, softening at plus 40 degrees Celsius, actively melting at plus 60 degrees Celsius and losing shape. It dreads high humidity, developing mold, absorbing odors, changing color and quality. It fears rodents. Mice and rats adore wax and will gnaw through any barrier to get it. For safely storing many tons of wax year-round, special facilities are needed. Cool but not cold, dry, well-ventilated, securely protected from pests. Vast warehouses spanning entire buildings. So, where were these warehouses at the palaces? In the basements of the main palace structures? Those already held wine in hundreds of barrels, food supplies, equipment, valuable utensils. No free space for tons of wax physically existed. In separate specialized buildings on palace grounds? Then logically, they'd appear on plans and blueprints. Architectural plans and drawings of 17th to 18th century palaces detail all service areas. Wine cellars, kitchens with hearths, stables, armories, firewood storages. But dedicated wax warehouses or candle storerooms? Marked nowhere. Not a single one. Perhaps because there was no need for such gigantic storage volumes of wax. Harvesting wax at apiaries and storing it in warehouses is one thing. It must be regularly delivered to the palace in large batches, with ironclad consistency, without interruptions in any weather or season. In the 17th to 18th centuries, the primary, and practically only cargo transport was horse-drawn wagons of varying capacity. A typical peasant wagon, pulled by a pair of horses, carries a maximum of 300 to 500 kilograms of payload. If a royal palace truly consumed a ton of wax weekly, or likely more, that means 2 or 3 heavy wagons every week just for wax. plus deliveries of provisions for hundreds of courtiers, barrels of wine, fabrics and clothing, furniture, firewood and coal for heating dozens of halls. A constant, unending stream of convoys and caravans entering the palace gates daily. Such activity should have been highly noticeable and recorded. In contemporaries' memoirs and diaries, there are indeed mentions of provision convoys for the royal table, wine caravans from famed regions, deliveries of luxury items and artworks, all described, documented with records. But regular wax caravans for candles? Mentioned nowhere, not once, in any source. Perhaps they simply didn't exist? Perhaps wax wasn't transported in such enormous volumes because it wasn't used in the claimed quantities. Then the natural question arises: what really lit the palaces? Maintaining candle lighting on such a scale in a massive palace isn't a side gig for regular servants. It's a distinct, complex profession requiring specialized skills and experience. You'd need people dedicated solely to this task daily, lighting thousands of candles synchronously before evening begins, constantly monitoring their state, timely replacing burned-out ones, extinguishing them in the morning, removing stubs, cleaning candlesticks and chandeliers of wax. For a palace the size of Versailles or the Winter Palace, this is work for several dozen or even 100, specially trained individuals operating as a coordinated team. At the French royal court under Louis XIV, several thousand people served in various specialties and roles. Each profession had clear positions with official titles and hierarchy placements. There were royal cupbearers, keepers of the royal wardrobe, overseers of royal parks and fountains, head chefs, masters of ceremonies. Each role is listed in staff schedules with known names, salaries, duties. But where in this detailed system are the chief masters of royal lighting? Why no position for candlekeeper or master of candle affairs? In official palace staff lists, such roles don't appear at all. An extremely odd situation. If lighting truly was a primary daily concern and a massive operation every evening, this service should have been enormous, vital, prestigious, with a clear hierarchy, but no traces or mentions survive. Perhaps because no such massive service was needed. Perhaps lighting functioned entirely differently, without requiring an army of attendants. Beeswax in the 17th to 18th centuries was exceedingly expensive by the era's standards, far pricier than honey, than many foodstuffs, than simple fabrics. A single quality wax candle cost about as much as a good loaf of white wheat bread. Not a product for the poor. Churches used expensive wax candles only for major festive services and for wealthy parishioners willing to pay. On ordinary days, even temples burned cheap tallow candles or oil lamps. Yet royal palaces, per the official version, supposedly burned tens of thousands of wax candles daily, without fail. Converting that to the era's hard currency yields an astronomical sum. Annual lighting costs for one palace alone would rival expenses for maintaining an entire army or navy. A huge, noticeable budget item. But in royal courts' financial reports and ledgers, the lighting or candle procurement line is either entirely absent or a negligible tiny entry in expenses. Meanwhile, other items are detailed exhaustively, spanning pages. Costs for court balls, the king's hunts, attire and jewelry, fireworks and festivities, all recorded to the last so. Where did the expenses for millions of wax candles vanish? Expenses that should devour a massive budget chunk. Why not a word in financial documents that are otherwise pedantic to the extreme? In the archives of Versailles and other royal residences, incredibly detailed reports on all court expenditures over decades survive. There are itemized records of daily royal table costs, rare wines from specific provinces, maintenance of royal gardens and fountains. Yes, it's authentically known how much was spent on musicians' wages in the court orchestra, how much custom fireworks for celebrations cost. Expenses for one major royal fireworks display could run tens of thousands of livres, and each is neatly noted with dates and performers. Costs for organizing a single court ball, specially ordered gowns, fresh flowers for hall decor, special food and drinks, all itemized line by line. Even feed expenses for the king's hunting dogs are recorded with monthly precision. But lighting costs for that same ball, which supposedly required thousands of expensive wax candles. Complete silence. Not a single line, not a single figure. If lighting truly was such a critically important, large-scale, costly element of palace life, why is it utterly unreflected in the minutely detailed financial reporting? One can logically surmise. Lighting either didn't demand such enormous ongoing material costs, or it operated on principles not requiring constant wax and candle purchases. Perhaps something entirely different glowed in the royal halls. Perhaps there were far fewer candles than official history claims, or the light sources were fundamentally different, not needing daily replacement. Palaces of the 17th to 18th centuries feature remarkably sophisticated and complex ventilation systems, concealed behind walls and in ceiling thicknesses. Networks of branched air ducts, artfully integrated into the building structure during construction. Officially, this is explained as architects' simple concern for occupants' comfort. Venting smoke and fumes from fireplaces, ensuring fresh air circulation in large halls. Sounds reasonable, but scrutinizing the duct's placement raises odd questions. Fireplaces and stoves are along room walls, yet main ventilation channels run under ceilings in halls' central areas. Why that layout? If halls constantly burned thousands of open candles, soot, smoke, and superheated air would inevitably rise to the ceiling. Effective exhaust indeed requires a powerful system right where massive chandeliers with hundreds of candles hang. Such systems do exist in old palaces, complex, engineered, designed for heavy loads. But here's the paradox. Thousands of simultaneous candles would produce such volumes of smoke, soot, and overheated air that existing ducts simply couldn't handle the load physically. Their throughput is insufficient for exhausting combustion products from thousands of open flames. Yet, for a small number of gas burners or even electric lighting, which also heats up, such ventilation would suffice nicely. Perhaps architects originally designed and built palaces for an entirely different, more advanced lighting type, not primitive wax candles. Perhaps hidden in walls are conduits for gas supply or even electrical wires, later disguised and renamed as ventilation ducts. Electricity in its modern sense officially emerged only at the very end of the 19th century. Edison's bulb, the first power plant, wiring in homes. Before the 1880s, household electricity supposedly didn't exist. But during large-scale restorations and repairs of old palaces built in the 17th to 18th centuries, things are sometimes found that utterly clash with this official timeline. In walls of some state halls, restorers unexpectedly discover copper or brass wires, carefully insulated with fabric, wax, or even primitive rubber. These finds are quickly and conveniently attributed to early 20th century wiring from initial electrification. The explanation seems logical, but there's a catch. Palaces were built in the 17th to 18th centuries, and some wires are clearly embedded in wall and ceiling thicknesses from the original construction phase. They're not laid over old plaster later, evident from building techniques and material layers, meaning these wires were installed initially centuries ago. In some museum, chandeliers never fully disassembled since installation. Detailed inspections reveal strange glass bulbs inside with metal contacts and enigmatic elements. They're usually explained as later restorer additions or erroneous parts accidentally included during repairs. A very convenient explanation, avoiding tough questions. But what if these were truly functional lighting system components existing in the palaces from the start? What if electricity supply technologies or analogs were known far earlier than the officially recognized date? Then many oddities and contradictions start forming a wholly different, shocking picture. Numerous 17th to 19th century paintings and engravings depict lavish balls, solemn receptions, and festivities in royal palaces. Halls overflowing with people in sumptuous attire, an atmosphere of radiance, magnificence, wealth. These images were meant to portray palace life's reality. Light sources in these antique depictions look astonishingly strange upon closer inspection. Sometimes artists do paint clear candles in holders with visible flames. But far more often, paintings show mere glowing points, bright light spots without any visible open fire or flame. Artists meticulously rendered the light flooding halls but omitted showing its source. In some detailed engravings, chandeliers appear as brightly glowing, shining objects. Yet no single candle or sign of open fire is visible. Perhaps artists simplified fine details for engraving convenience? Possible. Or perhaps they honestly depicted what they saw with their own eyes. Bright, even light without visible open flame. On many formal portraits of kings, queens, and noble courtiers from that time, a very bright, remarkably even light is clearly visible, uniformly illuminating the entire scene and subject. Such lighting character comes from modern electric soft lights and spotlights, but certainly not candles. Candlelight always yields warm, yellow-orange, constantly flickering, extremely uneven illumination with sharp, deep, dramatic shadows. Yet on old formal portraits, the light appears cool, bright white, perfectly steady, without flickering or harsh shadows. Where did such light come from in an era supposedly limited to primitive candles? Memoirs, diaries, and letters of 17th to 18th century courtiers preserve vivid, detailed descriptions of balls, receptions, masquerades, and other festivities. Authors meticulously described ladies' and gentlemen's opulent outfits, exquisite royal table dishes, court orchestra melodies, intriguing whispers in corners, dances, and flirtations. Every trifle of palace life made it onto memory pages, but in these exhaustive accounts, mentions of the hall lighting process itself are practically absent. No memoirist writes of servant armies solemnly igniting thousands of candles before a ball with special long tapers. No one complains of unbearable stuffiness and heat from hundreds of open flames in an enclosed space. Not a single mention of soot settling on luxurious gowns or mirrors. The process of replacing burned-out candles during the ball isn't described, though it should have been noticeable and somewhat disruptive. This seems extremely strange and inexplicable. If lighting truly was such a large-scale, labor-intensive, conspicuous process requiring constant attention and dozens of people's involvement, contemporaries were bound to notice, describe, comment on it. People of that era were observant, recording literally everything. How dishes were served at the royal table, the sequence of dances, courtiers' dress styles, who flirted with whom. But lighting, as if completely invisible, requiring no attention and causing no inconveniences. Perhaps because the hall lighting process was maximally simple, unobtrusive, automatic. Perhaps light simply appeared on its own, with a switch flip or valve turn, without fuss, effort, or hassle from dozens of people. World history is replete with documented examples of advanced technologies that existed in the distant past, were actively used, then irretrievably lost for centuries. The legendary Greek fire of the Byzantine Empire, a secret incendiary weapon that burned even on water. The exact recipe and production technology are lost forever. Modern recreations yield only approximate analogs. True Damascus steel, cold weapons with unique strength and flexibility. The multi-layer forging secret is lost. The precise technology can't be restored to this day. Roman concrete, a building material of incredible durability, standing 2,000 years strong. Exact composition unknown. Modern concrete crumbles after 50 to 100 years. All these technologies are proven by archaeological finds, written sources, surviving artifacts, but humanity can't fully reproduce them. Perhaps European palace lighting of the 17th to 18th centuries is another stark example of such lost technology. Perhaps there truly existed an effective way to create bright, clean, even safe light in large spaces without thousands of open flames, without constant consumable replacement. A technology based on principles we don't fully understand today or deliberately ignore. After a global catastrophe in the mid to late 19th century, this technology was lost along with the civilization that created and sustained it. New owners of captured or resettled palaces didn't understand how the complex lighting systems worked. They saw fixtures with sockets resembling candlesticks and took the simplest solution, inserted ordinary candles. Afterward, history books recorded a convenient version. Palaces were always lit by wax candles. This became official dogma, repeated for over 2 centuries. But physical artifacts, architectural features, documentary contradictions stubbornly tell a different story. All the discovered contradictions, oddities, and inconsistencies form a unified, shocking, yet logical picture of what happened. European palaces of the 17th to 18th centuries were originally built and equipped with lighting systems that fundamentally didn't require millions of wax candles and a huge army of servicing attendants. The lighting technology operated on entirely different, far more advanced principles. Perhaps gas lighting via pipelines, perhaps early forms of electricity, or maybe something even more technologically complex. After a destructive mid-19th century catastrophe, traces visible worldwide, the old highly developed world collapsed utterly. Technologies lost, knowledge destroyed or deliberately hidden. Qualified specialists perished. New palace owners, survivors, conquerors, or newcomers, gained luxurious ready-made buildings with intricate engineering systems. But they utterly failed to grasp many systems' workings, lacked technical documentation, couldn't find experts. They saw beautiful chandeliers with enigmatic light source sockets and adapted them to available primitive technology, inserted ordinary wax candles. Thus was born and entrenched the legend of millions of wax candles illuminating palaces. This convenient version was neatly inscribed in new history books and textbooks, taught in schools and universities. Generations passed, and no one remembers or knows what really was. All sincerely believe the official version, but impartial physics, cold economics, iron logic scream. Such quantities of beeswax candles were physically impossible to produce, store, deliver, and use. Candles in the claimed astronomical volumes didn't exist and simply couldn't. Palace lighting is yet another beautiful but utterly false fairy tale, concealing the true, far higher technological level of a perished civilization. In our day, some museums and palaces periodically stage historical reconstructions, attempting to light halls as in antiquity with wax candles. The results speak for themselves. Even using several hundred quality candles creates only dim, flickering, extremely uneven illumination. Most of the hall remains in semi-darkness and deep shadows. Room temperature quickly rises to uncomfortable levels. Within an hour, noticeable residue appears on gilding and mirrors. Candles must be constantly adjusted, drips removed, burned out ones replaced. It turns into a non-stop, exhausting process for a whole team. And that's just a few hundred candles under modern controlled conditions. Imagine scaling to several thousand candles daily for decades.
Physically impossible.
Millions of pure beeswax candles illuminating Europe's palaces every night. A pretty romantic fairy tale for gullible tourists and schoolbooks. But start calculating, asking simple questions, comparing facts, and this tale crumbles before your eyes. No industrial apiaries of needed scale. No clear documents on regular mass wax purchases. No special warehouses for storing tons of material. No staff army of candle servants in royal palaces. No detailed process descriptions in observant contemporaries' memoirs. No gigantic lighting expense item in pedantic financial reports. Only a repeatedly retold legend, mindlessly parroted for over 200 years. You're not obliged to blindly believe the alternative conspiratorial version of events, but at least allow yourself to doubt the official one and pose inconvenient questions. Visit any antique palace museum. Stand in the center of a vast state hall under a gigantic crystal chandelier. Look up attentively. Imagine as realistically as possible. Every evening, someone physically climbs to 6-story height and there, at 20 meters, manually swaps 300 hot candles several times per night. In dozens of halls simultaneously, daily, without weekends or holidays, for decades. Is this physically feasible, or are you being boldly, cynically, systematically lied to? If this detailed breakdown has at least made you ponder and doubt, if a desire arises to learn the real truth about other well-known historical facts, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Ahead are dozens more sharp topics and breakdowns where the official historical version fails even the simplest check by elementary logic and arithmetic. The real truth is much closer than it seems. You just need to stop blindly believing and start independently asking inconvenient, pointed questions.